Hello everybody. At this time in about, say, 48 hours, we will be discussing the aftermath of Super Bowl 48 between the Denver Broncos and Seattle Seahawks. And everybody will be putting in their 2 cents on what they saw in the game and what they think happened and what could have been done to change the outcome. But for now, it's time to talk about what we think will happen. You're listening to Real Steel Sports. This is James M. Krasnerick on Spreaker Web Radio. Glad you joined me here tonight. I've got a really good Super Bowl preview all lined up, and after this is over, I'll be doing different segments, and in every single segment, I'll be breaking down the candidates and my pick for every one of the 7 major NFL awards that will be announced tomorrow night. I've already did my prediction for the Hall of Fame, so you have to listen to that little segment. The awards will be MVP, Offensive and Defensive Players of the Year, Offensive and Defensive Rookies of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, and Coach of the Year. But for now, it's time to talk the big game, the one that we've waited all year for. Super Bowl 48, Seahawks Broncos. Hope everybody's ready. I put a lot of research into this game and did a lot of researching on the statistics for both teams. So I'm very, very well versed, very, very well informed on what I'm making my prediction on. I know what I'm doing, and since 2005, I've only gotten one Super Bowl incorrect, and that was the Super Bowl between the Steelers and the Packers. So I predicted the Steelers over the Seahawks in Super Bowl 40. I predicted the Colts over the Bears. It just goes on, and the only one that I have missed so far is Steelers and Packers, and I choose not to talk about that game for obvious reasons. But let's get started. We have the Broncos and the Seahawks meeting on February 2nd, 2014 for the 48th edition of the Super Bowl. Throughout the regular season, these are the 2 dominant teams in the league. Both finishing 13-3, both wrapping up home field, and both of them looking at some points in the season fairly indestructible. But the 2 teams couldn't be more different other than that. You've got the Denver Broncos, offensive juggernaut, blazing saddles, guns blowing, balls out football, just torch you and torch you some more. Highest scoring offense in league history. Scored 37.9 points per game, averaging over 450 yards a game, throwing for 340 yards a game, and a respectable 117 yards a game rushing. They one of the more underrated running attacks in the league, led by potential comeback player of the year in Noshawn Marino and up-and-coming running back out of Wisconsin, Monte Ball. For Seattle, they were a more conservative team, still a respectable 26 points a game. Their yardage totals, however, were fairly different from Denver's. 339 yards a game, enough to get the job done. 202 yards a game, again, they don't really need to throw the football much, but when they can, with quarterback, second-year player Russell Wilson, they can do that. And rushing yards, 136.8 per game with Pro Bowl running back Marshawn Lynch. Hell of a way to get it done. Whereas the Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks are, you could say Denver's more, aggressive in their offense. Seattle's more conservative. You couldn't be more different on the defense. You've got a Denver defense that's relatively conservative and laid back, more or less a run-stopping unit, and that's about it. 7th in the league in rushing yards, but 27th in passing yards. Overall, they rank at 25th in the league, I believe, at 24.9 points per game allowed, and they give up on average 356 yards a game. So that's going to spell trouble sometimes during the season, but during some points it's been an asset because many of the numbers that they've given up were late in games when teams were behind by 5 or 6 touchdowns. Because the way this offense scores, it's ridiculous. With Seattle, arguably the best single season a defense has had in the NFL since the 2008 Steelers. 14.4 points per game allowed, best in the league. Fewest yards allowed, fewest passing yards allowed. They just don't permit you to throw the football. They've got the best secondary in the league, arguably over the last 10-15 years, with safeties Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas, and very outspoken quarterback Richard Sherman, who is a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year with 8 interceptions. Had an incredible year. He's just been remarkable. The whole defense really has been remarkable, honestly, the way that they've been able to rise to the occasion. The run defense, though, they kind of struggle in the regular season, giving up 100.1 yards per game. But 101.6 yards per game, pardon me. But Denver and Seattle are similar in sacks. Denver 41, Seattle 43. So it'll be interesting to see how much pressure they put on the opposing quarterbacks. But when it came down to the playoffs, it's almost like the two teams, it's almost like Denver anteed it up on defense, and Seattle kind of didn't really ante it up at all. If you look at points per game, fairly similar. Denver only scoring 2 more points per game. Denver's offense continued to roll 435 yards a game total. Seattle's really sputtered. They ran the ball well, 133 yards a game, but Russell Wilson did not have that great a postseason up till this point. He's only thrown for 1 touchdown, and they've only averaged 159 yards a game through the air. On defense, Denver's run defense has been locked down at 64.5 yards a game, and that's going to be key to see how well Seattle runs the football. Seattle, on the other hand, has been pretty dreadful running the football. 134.5 yards per game isn't going to get it done against Denver. It may have gotten it done against New Orleans. It may have gotten it done against San Francisco, but it will not get that done against Denver. If Knowshon Moreno and Montee Ball can find holes in the Seattle defense, it's going to be a long day for the Seahawks. Those are some of the statistics, and now let's go for opinions and how the game actually features in terms of who has the edge. Let's go to the tail of the tape then. For the quarterback position, I give the edge to Denver, obviously. Peyton Manning, all the records he's set, he's played well in the postseason, and Russell Wilson's kind of sputtered, so I got to give the edge to Denver. The running back position, I'll give an edge to Seattle. I know that Denver is a little deeper with Montee Ball and Knowshon Moreno, but neither of those guys can hold a candle to Marshawn Lynch. He's one of the 2-3 best running backs in the league. He's, in terms of his ability to just have sheer power, but his underrated speed makes him even deadlier. So he's broken off some of the biggest runs in playoff history, and some of his playoff runs have actually caused seismic activity in Seattle. So what does that tell you? For the wide receivers and the tight ends, you got to go with Denver. I mean, I know Seattle gets Percy Harvin back, but seriously, Percy Harvin's the best receiver on the Seattle Seahawks, and yet he probably wouldn't have cracked the starting lineup in Denver. That just goes to show how good Denver's weapons are. That being said, though, I will have to say that Percy Harvin will probably play a big role in the Super Bowl because of his shiftiness and all those other characteristics. The offensive line's an edge to Denver. Seattle's offensive line blocks better in terms of running. They are a better run-clearing offensive line because Lynch has bigger holes to run through, and they're so good up front at creating lanes. For Denver, the reason why the offensive line is better is they pass protect so well. They pass protect as well as Seattle run blocks. But whenever you get a kind of a matchup like that, you got to go with the weakness. And I think that Denver's ability to run the football is better than Seattle's pass protection right now. For the defensive line, it's a push. You've got Seattle that's more of a pressure defensive line with Cliff Averill and Chris Clemens, guys that are designed to get to the quarterback, versus Terrence Knighton and Sean Phillips, who can get to the quarterback but are better run stoppers than anything. It's kind of a push. You can really pick your poison with what you want. The linebackers is an edge of Seattle because Bruce Irvin, Malcolm Smith, and Bobby Wagner, one of the best 4-3 linebacking cores in the game. The way they get off the ball and the way that they play pass and run defense is exceptional. For the secondary, huge edge of Seattle. Denver's secondary is really hurting. Other than Champ Bailey, they really have nothing else to go on. And Seattle's secondary is the best the league has seen in a long time. Special teams an edge to Seattle, definitely. Percy Harvin and Doug Baldwin's ability to return kickoffs. And Denver can return kickoffs pretty effectively too, but Seattle's ability to do that and the fact they cover so well in special teams on defense is also another key asset as to why they've been so successful. Coaching is a huge edge to Denver because not only do they have John Fox, who's been to the Super Bowl as a head coach, but Pete Carroll has never, before he came to Seattle, Carroll had never coached in a playoff game. He'd only been in the NFL for a handful of seasons. And look at what Denver's got on their roster. They've got an NFL head coach in Jack Del Rio as the defensive coordinator, who had a relatively respectable tenure when he was with the Jaguars. So an edge to Denver in coaching. For Denver, there are 3 keys to the game for them. 3 things they got to utilize. And number 1 is the receivers need to get separation and accumulate yards after the catch. Because if Seattle plays their physical style of defense, which I think they will, because they don't want to give a cushion to these receivers. Not at all. That means there'll be some tight windows for Peyton Manning to throw. And the cold weather and throwing the tight windows, that could be problematic for Denver. Denver's receivers, they need to get a cushion, so they won't have to do that. Seattle's defense is the best in the league by far, with fewest yards allowed after a catch per game. They average 85.1 yards per game after the catch. And if Denver's going to win this game, they got to at least double that. They got to be getting yards after the catch, because you don't want Peyton Manning throwing downfield against Richard Sherman, against Earl Thomas, because those guys are going to be there if he doesn't make a perfect throw. From the flip side, they got to stop Marshawn Lynch, because Marshawn Lynch in his career in the postseason, he steps it up. He averages 93 yards a game on the ground. He's got 6 postseason starts to his name in his career, and in 4 of those games he ran for over 100. That remembers the big game against the Saints in 2010 when the Saints were defending champs. These 2 playoff games against New Orleans and against San Francisco, he's just been so clutch. It's just been more or less him running downhill, and it doesn't matter if it's in Seattle or if it's on the road. When they line up to run the football, Marshawn Lynch is going to get some yards because he steps it up in the playoffs, and once he goes and cranks up into beast mode, there's really not much you can do to stop him. For Denver's running game, however, they got to utilize No. Sean Moreno, because let's put it this way. If Denver gets too far away from the run game and focuses more on just trying to beat the Legion of Boom secondary, they won't win. If they have to throw 35, 40, 45 times, well, 35 is probably the limit. That's probably what Peyton Manning wants to do. He probably wants to run at about maybe 20. He probably wants to keep it more or less balanced to keep Seattle off guard. But if Seattle is stopping the run effectively and Peyton has to beat them in tight coverage, because Seattle's going to be in nickel for a lot of the game to try to stop the receivers that the Broncos have. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, because Seattle's allowed 134 rushing yards a game this postseason. New Orleans and San Francisco had big days on the ground. But I will comment that it's probably different for Seattle in this game, the game plan, versus San Francisco, more or less, because Kaepernick can run. And Drew Brees actually's got some respectable speed. It's not very much, but still. Peyton Manning is like a snail. He's not going to run. He's not going to run for first downs. If you've watched him run, go back to 2010 when he's a member of the Colts, and you saw the run against the Raiders towards the end of the regular season. It was almost comical how slow he was. So if Denver's going to want to win this game, they can't abandon the run early. Let's put it this way. If they can run the ball very effectively, they will win, because Seattle's not going to be able to game plan for both. As for Seattle, they got to let the Legion of Boom just go hang out, let it all hang out. They really do, because they got the best pass defense and the best secondary that the league has seen in a long time. When you've got a secondary with guys like Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, and Earl Thomas, all 3 of them were Pro Bowlers, and all 3 of them can hit you and intercept the football. It's scary. But Walter Thurman, the other quarterback, I know Brandon Browner's suspended for drug violation, but Walter Thurman's a respectable corner. He's had several interceptions this year and can make plays. And keep in mind, the last few games the Broncos have played offensively, they've not been that impressive. And you can say, well, how have they not been that impressive? Well, New England and San Diego's defenses are not that good. They're really not. And yet Denver averaged 25 points a game against them. Now, that'd be good for a lot of offenses, but for Denver, be averaging 37, it's kind of a warning sign. Because Denver and San Diego, New England and San Diego, their defenses are vastly inferior to Seattle's. As for Seattle, they got to exploit the opposing secondary that they're going against from the offensive standpoint. Russell Wilson has not played well this postseason. He's not. And he's going to have to in this game, because Denver's run defense is not giving up big plays in the run game. They're allowing just over 100 yards per game, which is about 7th in the league. But through 18 games, they've allowed over 250 yards a game through the air. And if Denver's going to be giving up 250 yards a game through the air, Russell Wilson, you're going to have to take flight and play well. He's been inconsistent, but if he throws the ball well on Sunday, then there's really not much Denver's going to be able to do to stop it. Champ Bailey, respectable quarterback he is, he's going to have a hell of a time. He really is, because he's probably going to be matched up against Percy Harvin or Doug Baldwin. Those guys are